They say some secrets are worth climbing for, but when the rain-soaked little girl on the stairs looked up at me and whispered hers, I knew my life was about to change forever. If you believe in stories where one moment can alter every path ahead, don't forget to subscribe for more. The drizzle had been falling all afternoon, soft and persistent, the kind of late October rain that seeped into everything, your jacket, your boots, your bones. In Seattle, you learn to live with it, but that day, it felt colder than usual. Maybe it was the way the wind carried the damp salt from Elliott Bay, curling between the narrow streets like fingers searching for warmth. I'd just finished delivering a fully restored '68 Mustang to a client in one of those luxury high-rises downtown, the kind with glass walls, concierge desks, and elevators that whispered instead of clanged. The job had been a rush order, and I'd stayed up half the night getting the chrome right. My hands still smelled faintly of oil and metal polish. The Mustang purred away under the pale glow of the street lamps, leaving me alone on the slick pavement. Neon from the cafe across the street smeared across the wet asphalt in pinks and blues. Somewhere nearby, a ferry horn bellowed low and distant, then was swallowed by the patter of rain. That's when I saw her. She was no more than 5, curled up on the bottom steps of the building's side entrance, a faded teddy bear pressed tight against her chest. Her hospital bracelet caught the light when she shifted, the thin plastic glistening with raindrops. Strands of light brown hair stuck to her forehead, and her breathing, shallow, uneven, made something in my chest tighten. I crouched down a few feet away, keeping my voice gentle. "Hey, kiddo. You lost?" She shook her head without looking at me. "You waiting for someone?" Another shake. Her eyes flicked to mine, then darted away, quick as a bird. "I'm Nathan," I said, like offering my name might make me less of a stranger. "I work on cars. Just finished dropping one off here." She blinked, as if weighing whether that piece of information mattered. Then, very quietly, she said, "Will you carry me up the stairs?" My instinct screamed for a dozen questions. "Where's your mom? Are you hurt? Should I call someone?" But something in her voice told me that right now, she needed action more than interrogation. "Sure thing," I said, stepping closer. "But you've got to tell me your name." "Lily." Her fingers tightened around the bear. "If you carry me, I'll tell you a secret." It wasn't the kind of proposition you hear from a child without feeling the weight of it. I bent down, slid my arms under her small frame, and lifted her. She was light, too light, and I could feel the faint tremor of her breaths against my chest. Her hospital bracelet brushed my wrist. The stairwell was quiet except for the echo of my boots on the concrete. Water dripped from the hem of my jacket. Halfway up, she leaned toward my ear and whispered, "My mom is very lonely." It caught me off guard. Not "I'm sick," not "I'm scared," but this, an observation about someone else's pain. I didn't know what to say, so I just tightened my hold on her. We reached the 3rd floor. She pointed to a door with a brass number and a green wreath hanging crookedly. I knocked. It took a long moment before the door opened. A woman stood there, her dark blonde hair pulled into a low bun, dressed in tailored slacks and a cream blouse. She looked like she'd just stepped away from a spreadsheet, sharp, composed, but her eyes instantly betrayed a flicker of panic when she saw her daughter in my arms. "Lily," she breathed, kneeling to take the girl from me. "I told you not to go outside." "She was sitting on the stairs," I said, trying not to sound accusatory. "Her breathing didn't seem right. You might want to—" "I know," the woman cut in, her tone defensive but not unkind. "She has a compromised immune system. We're careful." She hesitated, then added, "Thank you for bringing her up." Her voice softened when she looked back at Lily. "Inside, sweet pea. You need to change out of those wet clothes." The girl lingered just long enough to glance over her mother's shoulder at me. It wasn't a goodbye. It was more like she was making sure I'd remember what she said. The door closed, leaving me in the hall with the faint scent of lavender drifting through the air. I stood there longer than I should have, listening to the muted hum of the building. Somewhere inside, a child was changing into warm clothes, and a woman, lonely, if her daughter's secret was to be believed, was probably trying to steady her own heartbeat. Back outside, the rain had picked up, drumming against the awning. I shoved my hands into my jacket pockets and started toward the street, but my mind kept circling back to the look in Lily's eyes. I'd seen eyes like that before, in a dusty village overseas, in a military field hospital, in my sister Sophie's room when the chemo was too much for her. They were the eyes of someone who had already learned too much about the fragility of life. And for reasons I couldn't explain, I had a feeling that secret she whispered wasn't just meant for me to hear, it was meant for me to do something about. That night, back at my small apartment above the garage, I couldn't focus on anything else. Not the invoices piling on my desk, not the hum of the fridge, not even the rain against the windows. My mind replayed the way she'd said it. My mom is very lonely, like it was the kind of truth that needed to be carried carefully, like the teddy bear in her arms. I told myself I'd probably never see her again, that whatever was going on in that apartment wasn't my business. But deep down, I already knew I was lying to myself. The rain hadn't let up all week. In Seattle, that wasn't news. Rain was part of the city's heartbeat, but some days it pressed heavier, clinging to every window and pooling in the seams of cracked sidewalks. That Thursday morning, I was crouched beside a black Toyota SUV in the courtyard of the same luxury building where I'd first met Lily. The job was straightforward. A neighbor of my client had complained about a grinding noise when turning. Turned out to be nothing more than worn brake pads and a loose splash shield. Easy fix, though my knuckles were raw from working bare-handed in the cold. From where I worked, I had a clear view of the building's arched entryway. Tenants moved in and out under the wide stone canopy, umbrella tips dripping, heels clicking, leather briefcases tucked tight against trench coats. That's when I spotted her again. Lily was standing just inside the glass doors, her small hand pressed against the pane, watching me with that same unblinking curiosity she'd had on the stairs. Today she wore a pink knit hat with a pom-pom, the edges framing her pale cheeks. In her other hand, she clutched the same teddy bear. I gave a small wave, expecting her to disappear back inside. Instead, she slipped past the concierge's desk, without a jacket, and padded out into the damp air. "You again," I said, leaning on my wrench as she approached. "You're going to rust faster than this SUV if you keep coming out here without a coat." She ignored the warning and peered at the wheel I'd been working on. "Does it still work?" "It will in a few minutes." I tapped the brake caliper. "Your neighbor's brakes were squealing." "All fixed now." She tilted her head as if filing away the information for later. Then she stepped closer, lowered her voice, and said, "Do you want to hear another secret?" Something about her tone made me pause. I nodded slowly. She glanced toward the lobby doors to make sure no one was listening, then leaned in. "My mom works all the time. She never laughs, not even at funny things." I tightened my grip on the wrench. That wasn't the kind of thing a child should have to notice, let alone say out loud. "Everyone laughs sometimes," I offered carefully. She shook her head. "Not my mom." The sound of the building's door swinging open made her step back. Rachel emerged, her hair pulled into a sleek twist, a tailored navy coat falling perfectly over her frame. She carried a reusable coffee cup in one hand and a leather portfolio in the other. Her eyes landed on Lily, and a flicker of frustration crossed her face. "Lily, you know you're not supposed to be outside without telling me." The little girl didn't move, but her hand slipped into mine with quiet certainty. It was a small, warm grip, unexpected, grounding. Rachel's gaze shifted to where our hands were joined, and for a heartbeat, something unreadable passed between us. "I see you've met our resident mechanic," she said, her voice calm but edged. "Brake job for your neighbor," I explained, keeping my tone neutral. "She just came over to say hi." "Thank you for keeping an eye on her," Rachel said after a pause. She reached for Lily's hand, but the girl held on to me for a moment longer before letting go. Rachel guided her toward the entrance. "Come on, sweet pea. I have a conference call in 15 minutes. I watched them walk inside, their figures reflected in the wet pavement. Something in that short exchange left me unsettled, not in a bad way, but in the kind of way you feel when a door cracks open just enough to glimpse a room you hadn't known existed. Over the next week, I found myself in and out of that building more than usual. Part of it was business. Word spreads quickly when you do honest work, and soon I had calls from residents asking me to check this or replace that. But part of it was, well, I wasn't ready to admit even to myself that I was looking for a small pink hat or a familiar teddy bear. Every time I ran into Lily, it was the same. She'd appear without warning, ask one or two pointed questions, and then vanish back into her world upstairs. And Rachel? She'd give polite nods, the kind you exchange with an acquaintance in the grocery store aisle, acknowledging presence but maintaining distance. One afternoon, I helped Mrs. Winslow from the 7th floor haul 3 cases of bottled water up from her car. She was the type of elderly tenant every building has, the one who knew everyone's business and pretended she didn't. She thanked me profusely, then leaned on her cane and said, "You've become quite the familiar face here, Mr. Cole. I think the Hartman girl likes you." I kept my response casual. "She's a sharp kid." Mrs. Winslow's eyes twinkled. "Her mother could use a friend too, whether she knows it or not." The comment stayed with me. I thought of Lily's second secret, about the absence of laughter, and the way Rachel's voice carried a subtle weariness when she spoke. 2 days later, I was back at the SUV's parking spot to return the keys to its owner. I heard the faint squeak of sneakers before I saw her. Lily came skipping around the corner, her teddy bear tucked under her arm. "You fixed the car," she said, almost accusingly, like she'd expected me to leave it broken for some grander plan. "That's what I do," I replied with a small grin. "You feeling better today?" She nodded but didn't elaborate. Instead, she looked toward the street where the drizzle blurred the view of the city skyline. "Do you think my mom will ever laugh again?" The question caught me off guard. "What makes you think she won't?" "She used to," Lily said matter-of-factly, "before I got sick." I crouched so we were eye level. "Sometimes people get scared, and it makes it hard for them to show happy things. Doesn't mean they don't feel them inside." She studied my face as if testing whether I believed my own words. Then, without warning, she reached out and slipped her hand into mine again, just like before, a simple act that felt bigger than it looked. Rachel's voice called from the lobby. "Lily?" We both turned to see her standing at the glass doors, phone in one hand, brows drawn tight. "Coming," Lily yelled back. But she didn't let go immediately. Only when Rachel stepped outside did she release my hand and trot over. Rachel glanced at me briefly, her expression unreadable. "Thank you," she said in a tone that sounded half grateful, half unsure of what exactly she was thanking me for. "No problem," I replied. They disappeared inside, leaving me with rain on my jacket and the faint sensation of a small hand still in mine. That night, as I wiped down my workbench, I thought about the way Lily had posed her question, as if laughter were a thing that could be lost forever. I thought about Rachel's guarded eyes, about the unspoken spaces between their words, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just been handed another secret, one I didn't know how to fix yet, but wanted to. Seattle's skyline looked washed in silver that morning, the sunlight too thin to burn away the lingering mist over Elliott Bay. I had just closed up the garage after an early oil change when my phone buzzed, a number I didn't recognize. Hello? The voice on the other end was clipped but familiar. Nathan Cole, this is Rachel Hartman from the apartment building. I straightened. Yes, hi. Everything okay? There was a pause, like she was weighing the wisdom of calling me at all. I'm stuck in a client meeting that's running over. Lily has her oncology follow-up at Seattle Children's in 30 minutes. The hospital's only a few miles away, but I can't get there in time. I know this is a lot to ask. I'll take her, I said before she could finish. Silence. Then, thank you. The doorman will bring her down. She's ready. 10 minutes later, Lily emerged from the lobby bundled in a quilted navy coat and holding her ever-present teddy bear. The doorman gave me a once-over like he was silently running a background check, then nodded. She's all yours, Mr. Cole. In the truck, Lily buckled herself in without prompting, swinging her legs lightly. Do you know where we're going? I do, I said. Your mom told me. She looked satisfied with that. We go there a lot. They check my blood and sometimes take pictures inside my chest. It's boring. Then we'll make it less boring, I promised, pulling into traffic. The drive to the hospital wound through downtown streets still slick from last night's rain. Outside the passenger window, Pike Place Market was just coming alive, fishmongers shouting, crates of tulips glowing in the gray morning light. Lily pressed her forehead to the glass to watch, her breath leaving small clouds on the window. Have you ever been to the market? She asked. Plenty of times. Used to go with my sister Sophie. She liked the fresh cinnamon rolls. Her gaze flicked to me. Where is she now? I hesitated, choosing my words carefully. She passed away when she was about your age. She was very sick. Lily nodded like she understood more than a 5-year-old should. That's why you're nice to me. Part of it, I admitted. Seattle Children's Hospital rose from the hill like a bright fortress of glass and steel. I found a spot in the parking garage and walked with her through the covered walkway. Inside, the smell of antiseptic mingled with the sweetness of the volunteer-run coffee cart. At the check-in desk, Lily greeted the receptionist like an old friend. Hi, Megan. Hey, Lilybug, Megan said, handing her a sticker shaped like a star. Dr. Patel's ready for you. We took the elevator up to the oncology floor. The walls were painted with murals, whales and jellyfish, schools of bright fish swimming through turquoise seas. In the waiting room, a TV played cartoons no one was watching. Lily climbed into one of the vinyl chairs, swinging her feet. Will you come in with me? If it's okay with your mom, I said automatically. Lily grinned. She said you could. Dr. Patel, a soft-spoken man with silver-rimmed glasses, greeted us warmly. Good to see you again, Lily. And you must be Nathan. Just here to make sure she gets her ride home, I said. The exam was routine. Vitals, blood draw, a quick listen to her lungs. Still, I watched closely. Years in the military had taught me to read small details, the slight tightening of Lily's jaw when the needle went in, the faint lines of fatigue under her eyes. While the nurse entered notes into the chart, Lily asked me, Do you have any Army stories? I chuckled. Plenty. You want a scary one or a funny one? Funny. So I told her about the time a raccoon broke into our field camp and stole an entire loaf of bread, and how my commanding officer nearly gave chase in full gear. By the end, she was laughing so hard she had to wipe her eyes. That's when I saw Rachel, standing just outside the glass wall of the exam room, portfolio still in hand, watching her daughter through the window. She wasn't smiling exactly, but the tightness in her face had eased, and her eyes softened in a way I hadn't seen before. After the appointment, Rachel met us in the lobby. You made good time, she said to me. She did great, I replied, holding out the hospital folder. All set until next week. Rachel took it, then glanced at Lily, who was still smiling from the raccoon story. You look happy. I am, Lily said simply. Rachel's eyes flickered toward me, a hint of gratitude beneath the guarded expression. Thank you, Nathan. I owe you one. Anytime, I said, and meant it. As I walked back to my truck, I realized something had shifted. Not much, just enough to sense that the wall between us wasn't impenetrable anymore, and it wasn't me who'd done it. It was Lily, carrying her own kind of quiet courage, pulling the people in her life closer together without even trying. The first warning came just after noon, a Pacific storm barreling toward the coast, stronger than anything Seattle had seen this late in the year. By 3 o'clock, the city was under a flood advisory, and the wind off the bay was fierce enough to rattle the windows of my garage. I was underneath a Subaru, tightening the last bolt on an exhaust system, when my phone buzzed. The screen lit up with Rachel's name. Her voice was thin, frayed. Nathan, it's Lily. She's running a fever, high, and she's breathing fast. The ambulance says they can't get through. The streets are flooded. I was already wiping my hands on a rag, adrenaline kicking in. Send me your location. I'll be there in 10. Outside, the rain was coming down in sheets, the kind that made streetlights glow like blurred halos. My old F-250 sat ready in the alley, tires thick with off-road tread, leftover from my Army days when mud and water were just part of the job. Rachel texted, "Basement garage, elevators out." When I pulled into their building's service entrance, the water in the street was ankle-deep, swirling with leaves and grit. I killed the engine, grabbed a spare blanket from the back seat, and sprinted inside. She was there, Rachel, kneeling beside Lily on the cold, concrete floor of the garage. Lily's cheeks were flushed, her breaths shallow and rapid. Her teddy bear was clutched against her chest like it might help her lungs work harder. Temperature's at least 103, Rachel said, her voice trembling but steady enough to be in control. And she's tachypnic, breathing over 30 per minute. She's immunocompromised, Nathan. A febrile episode could... She stopped herself, as if speaking the worst case out loud might make it real. I scooped Lily into my arms, the blanket wrapping her small body. Let's move. Driving through downtown was like navigating a river with traffic lights. Water splashed over the hood with every turn, waves breaking against curbs. The wipers struggled to keep up, slapping back and forth in a frantic rhythm. Rachel sat in the back seat with Lily, one hand on her daughter's forehead, the other clutching the seatbelt. She's so warm. God, I should have called sooner. You called when you needed to, I said, eyes locked on the flooded road ahead. Seattle Children's has a generator. They'll be ready. We cut through side streets I knew from years of pickups and deliveries, avoiding the worst of the flooding. But near Eastlake, a section of the main road was blocked by a stalled bus, its hazard lights blinking dimly through the rain. Rachel's voice was tight. We'll never get around in time. Yes, we will. I swung the truck into a narrow service lane, climbing over a section of raised concrete meant for maintenance vehicles. The F-250 growled, suspension rocking as we splashed back onto open asphalt. By the time the hospital came into view, the storm had only worsened. I pulled up to the ER entrance and the automatic doors slid open to a rush of fluorescent light and the smell of antiseptic. A triage nurse was already waiting with a gurney. What have we got? She asked as I carried Lily inside. 5-year-old female, acute febrile episode, history of leukemia, possible neutropenia. Rachel rattled off like she'd been rehearsing it for years. The nurse nodded, jotting notes. Room 3 now. I laid Lily gently on the bed. And Rachel was instantly at her side, brushing damp hair from her forehead. A doctor swept in, issuing orders, oxygen cannula, IV fluids, broad-spectrum antibiotics. I stepped back, letting the professionals take over, but my chest stayed tight until I heard the steady beep of the heart monitor and saw the oxygen saturation numbers start to climb. An hour later, Rachel found me in the hallway, her hair damp from the rain, the tension in her shoulders finally loosening. "They've stabilized her. Fever's coming down. You—" She swallowed, her voice catching. "You saved her life tonight, Nathan." I shook my head. "The doctors saved her. I just drove the truck." Her eyes softened, though her hands still trembled faintly. "If you hadn't come, she wouldn't have made it here in time. That's not something I can ever repay." "You don't owe me anything," I said quietly. "She's your little girl, and she's a fighter." Rachel's gaze held mine for a moment longer than necessary. The storm still raging outside, but something warmer sparking in that space between us. Later, when I stepped out of the hospital, the rain had eased to a mist. The streets were still slick, the air smelling of wet asphalt and salt from the bay. I looked back at the lit windows of the ER, knowing Lily was inside, safe for now. I also knew this night had changed something. Not just for Rachel, not just for Lily, but for me. I'd gone from someone on the edge of their lives to someone they could call in the worst moment. And once you've been that person, you can't go back to being just the guy who fixes cars. It had been 3 days since the storm, but the memory of it still clung to me. The way the rain blurred every streetlight, the sound of Rachel's voice over the phone, the frightening lightness of Lily in my arms. She'd pulled through. That was all that mattered. On Friday morning, as I was elbow deep in an engine rebuild, a shadow crossed the open garage door. I looked up to see Rachel standing there in a long camel coat, her hair loose for the first time since I'd met her. In one hand, she held a cardboard carrier with 2 paper coffee cups, in the other, a white bakery box. "I thought you could use a caffeine refill," she said. "Depends," I replied, setting down my wrench. "What's the catch?" She smiled, small but genuine. "No catch. Just thank you for the other night." We sat at the workbench, the air warm with the smell of fresh espresso and motor oil. She slid the box toward me, revealing a half-dozen pastries, glossy with sugar glaze. "These are from Macrina," she said. "Best in Seattle." I took a bite of something flaky and sweet, then nodded toward the wall behind her. "Haven't seen anyone bring bakery to my shop in years. You're setting a dangerous precedent." That was when she noticed the photograph. It hung above the tool rack, an 8x10 in a simple black frame. A girl with light brown hair sat cross-legged in the grass, holding an open book. Her smile was crooked, as if she'd just thought of something she wasn't going to tell you. Rachel leaned closer. "She's beautiful. Your daughter?" I shook my head. "My sister, Sophie. She was 10 when that was taken." Rachel studied the picture. "She has your eyes." I didn't answer right away. "Acute lymphoblastic leukemia," I said finally. "She fought for 2 years. I was stationed at Fort Lewis when she passed. Couldn't get leave approved in time. By the time I made it home..." I trailed off, my throat tight. "I've never forgiven myself for not being there." The rain outside tapped lightly on the metal roof. Rachel's voice softened. "Nathan, that wasn't your fault. You were serving your country." I met her gaze. "Doesn't matter. I wasn't serving her. That's what I think about every time I see Lily in that hospital." I got up, rummaged in the back, and returned with a worn hardcover book, The Little Prince. Its blue cover was faded, the corners frayed from years of being turned by small hands. "This was Sophie's," I said. "She read it so many times she could quote half of it." Rachel traced the cover with her fingers. "It's beautiful." I held it out. I want Lily to have it. Her eyes widened. Nathan, I can't. You can, I interrupted gently. Sophie would want me to give it to someone who needs it. And Lily's the kind of kid who sees the world the way the prince did. Curious, honest, maybe a little too wise for her age. Rachel closed the book slowly, as if sealing a promise. I'll make sure she takes care of it. We talked for another half hour about nothing and everything. Seattle traffic, her work at the real estate firm, the way Lily insists on naming every pigeon she sees on the walk to school. There were still walls between us, but they felt lower, easier to see over. When she finally stood to leave, she paused at the garage door. You know, she said, Lily's been drawing pictures of you. In a truck, always coming to get her. I chuckled. Guess I'd better live up to the role. The door swung closed behind her, leaving the scent of coffee and rain mingling in the shop. I glanced up at Sophie's photo, then at the empty spot on the workbench where the little prince had sat for years. For the first time in a long while, giving something away didn't feel like losing it. Seattle Children's smelled the same as it always did. Sterile but faintly sweet, like someone had tried to make antiseptic less intimidating. Outside, the sky was a blank slate of gray, a heavy overcast pressing down on the city. Inside, the waiting room buzzed with the low hum of vending machines and the soft shuffle of parents' shoes against linoleum. I wasn't supposed to be here today. Rachel hadn't asked me to come. But when she mentioned at the garage 2 days ago that Lily's next appointment was a big one, I found myself driving across town anyway. I told myself it was to drop off a replacement part for the Hartman's neighbor, half true, but really it was the way Rachel's voice had gone quiet on that word big. I spotted them at the far end of the waiting room. Lily was curled into a corner seat, legs tucked up, reading The Little Prince. Rachel sat beside her, portfolio in her lap, eyes fixed on nothing in particular. Her expression was one I recognized from military briefings, people waiting for news they can't control. The nurse called their name, and they rose together. I fell in step without asking, and Rachel didn't object. The exam room was bright but windowless. Charts lined the walls, immune system diagrams, oncology treatment schedules. Dr. Patel entered with a clipboard and a face that was kind but serious. He began with small talk for Lily's benefit, commenting on her book, asking about her favorite chapter. But his tone shifted as he addressed Rachel. I'm afraid the latest labs show progression, he said gently. Her leukemic cell count has increased since the last evaluation. Rachel's knuckles whitened around the armrest. So, what does that mean exactly? Dr. Patel's voice was steady, clinical, but compassionate. It means the current chemotherapy protocol is no longer holding the disease in check. At this stage, the standard recommendation is a hematopoietic stem cell transplant, a bone marrow transplant, as soon as possible. The words hung in the air like a low ceiling. Rachel's eyes darted between him and Lily, who was now distractedly tracing the edge of her book's cover. What are her chances without it? Without a transplant, Dr. Patel said, the prognosis becomes significantly poorer. With a successful transplant, remission rates are much higher, especially for her age group. What about risks? He didn't hesitate. As with any transplant, there's a risk of graft versus host disease. That's when the donor's immune cells attack the patient's body. We mitigate this with a conditioning regimen, chemotherapy, and sometimes radiation, to prepare her system. But the transplant process is physically demanding and not without complications. Rachel swallowed hard. How soon? Immediately, Dr. Patel said. We'll need to start HLA matching right away. Ideally, a 10-10 match from a sibling is best, but since Lily is an only child, we'll search the National Registry. We can also explore international databases. The technical terms were second nature to me. I'd read enough about leukemia after Sophie's diagnosis to understand, but for Rachel, they landed like a foreign language. She pressed her hand to her forehead. So, you just find someone and hope they're willing? Yes, Dr. Patel said. And the earlier we identify a match, the better her odds. I stayed quiet, but every muscle in my body was coiled. This was the point in Sophie's story where hope had begun to slip away. I wasn't about to let that happen again. After the doctor left, Rachel sat frozen in her chair, the folder of consent forms unopened in her lap. I leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "We'll find a donor," I said. Her eyes lifted to mine, sharp and almost angry. "You say that like it's simple. It isn't. It's weeks, months of searching. And every day she waits. Her chances." Her voice cracked. She turned away quickly, brushing at her cheek. I didn't push. Instead, I pulled out my phone and started typing. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Calling in favors," I said. "I've still got contacts from my Army unit, guys who've been on donor lists for years, and a friend at the VA hospital downtown. We can widen the net." Rachel shook her head slightly, like she didn't believe it would matter. But she didn't tell me to stop. Lily looked up from her book then, as if sensing the heaviness in the room. "Why are you sad, Mom?" Rachel smoothed her daughter's hair. "We're just figuring out the next step for you, sweet pea." "Is it another secret?" Lily asked, glancing at me. "Not a secret," I said softly. "Just something we're going to fix. All of us." She smiled faintly, the kind that carried more trust than she should have to give at her age. On the drive back, Rachel sat in the back seat with Lily, her hand on the little girl's knee. I could see her face in the rear-view mirror, calm for Lily's sake, but every so often, her eyes met mine in a silent exchange that said what words couldn't. Don't let her slip away. By the time I dropped them at the apartment, I'd already decided. I wasn't just going to help search for a donor. If there was even a chance I was a match, I was going to get tested myself. Some debts you can't repay, some you can only pay forward. The rain had eased into a fine mist by late afternoon, the kind that barely seemed to fall but left your clothes damp in minutes. I was back at the Hartman's building, not for work this time, but to drop off a stack of HLA donor registry forms and instructions I'd picked up from the VA hospital. I figured Rachel could start filling them out tonight. The doorman waved me toward the elevator, but halfway up, the car stopped at the second floor. The doors slid open to reveal Lily, sitting cross-legged on the carpeted hallway floor, coloring in a book with half-broken crayons. She looked up, eyes brightening. "Hi, Nathan." "Hey, kiddo," I said, stepping out. "What are you doing down here?" "Waiting for you," she said simply, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. "Your mom know you're—" "She's on the phone," Lily interrupted, standing and tucking the crayons into her coat pocket. "She talks to doctors a lot now. I don't like it when she sounds scared." I knelt to her level. "You know she's just trying to make you better, right?" She nodded, then tilted her head as if deciding whether to say more. "Can I tell you something?" We ended up in the little alcove by the stairwell, a quiet corner where the carpet muffled our voices and the hum of the building's heating system filled the spaces in between. Lily set her teddy bear on the step beside her, smoothing its worn fur. "I heard Mom talking about the bone marrow thing," she began. "She doesn't know I was listening." Her voice was calm, but I could see the tension in her small hands, twisting the teddy's ear. "She said it's going to be really hard and maybe it won't work." I swallowed. Sometimes grown-ups talk about things they're afraid of. Doesn't mean it will happen. She looked straight at me then, no hesitation, no blinking. "If I have to do the hard thing, will you promise to take care of Mom?" The words hit me like a gut punch. "Lily," I started, but she pressed on. "I don't want her to be alone. She works too much and she doesn't laugh, but she's the best mom. If you promise, I won't be scared." For a moment, I couldn't speak. Sophie's face flashed in my mind, not the smiling girl from the photo in my garage, but the last time I saw her, pale and small in a hospital bed, asking if I'd take care of our parents. I'd said yes, and then been halfway across the world when she slipped away. This time, I wouldn't be absent. I held out my hand, palm up. "I promise, Lily." She studied me for a second, then placed her tiny hand in mine. Her grip was surprisingly firm. "It's a deal," she said. "Deals like this," I told her, "are more than promises. They're pacts. You know what that means?" She shook her head. "It means it's a promise you keep no matter how hard it gets. No excuses. No backing out." Her mouth curved into a small smile. "Then we have a pact." We sat there for a while, just listening to the quiet. Then she asked, "Will you still come visit me in the hospital when they do the bone marrow thing?" "Every day I can," I said. "And I'll bring stories, maybe even some army ones I haven't told you yet." Her eyes lit up. "And coffee for Mom. She likes it when it smells like caramel." I laughed. "Consider it done." Rachel found us in the stairwell a few minutes later, her voice echoing softly as she called, "Lily? Nathan?" "We're here," I replied, standing. She came into view, phone still in hand, a crease of worry between her brows. "I didn't realize you were stopping by," she said to me. "Had something for you," I said, handing her the packet of forms. "Registry sign-ups, info on the process, contact numbers for the VA and donor search coordinators." Her fingers lingered on the papers. "You didn't have to." "Yes, I did," I said, maybe a bit more firmly than intended. "The sooner we start, the better." Rachel's eyes searched mine for a beat, then softened. "Thank you." Later that evening, I sat in my truck in the dimly lit parking lot, replaying the moment Lily had slipped her hand into mine. It wasn't just the words, it was the clarity in her gaze, the way she'd made it sound less like a request and more like an assignment. I'd spent years following orders, some easy, some nearly impossible, but none had ever felt as heavy or as necessary as this one. The next few days blurred into a rhythm of phone calls, emails, and quiet visits to the apartment. I watched as Rachel juggled work deadlines with hospital consultations, her exhaustion barely hidden. Sometimes she'd hand me a grocery list without asking if I had the time. I didn't mind. Lily, true to her word, didn't act afraid. She'd talk about the transplant like it was just another step, the same way she might describe a trip to the dentist, unpleasant but necessary. But every so often I'd catch her watching her mom with an expression too serious for a 5-year-old, and I knew she was still holding on to our pact. One afternoon, while Rachel was out on a client call, Lily and I sat at the kitchen table coloring. She pushed a sheet of paper toward me. It was a drawing of 3 stick figures, one tall, one medium, one small, standing in front of a truck with big tires. The tall figure had my name written above it in block letters. The medium one had Mom, and the small one, me. Above all 3, in a shaky hand, she'd written, "No matter what." I looked at her, my throat tightening. "Is this us?" She nodded. "It's the pact." When Rachel returned, Lily ran to show her the picture. Rachel studied it for a long moment, her eyes glistening. She glanced at me, and for once, there was no guarded wall, just quiet understanding. She didn't know the full conversation we'd had in the stairwell, but I think in that moment she sensed there was something unspoken between her daughter and me, something she might not have asked for, but was starting to trust. That night, back in my apartment above the garage, I pinned Lily's drawing next to Sophie's photo. 2 promises, years apart, bound together in the same quiet space. And for the first time in a long while, I felt certain I wouldn't fail this one. The email came just after sunrise, its subject line stark in my inbox. Potential HLA match identified, urgent. I was halfway through my first cup of coffee when I saw it, the steam curling into the cold air of my apartment above the garage. My pulse kicked up before I even opened the message. It was from the transplant coordinator at Seattle Children's. The tone was cautious but promising. We have located an anonymous donor with a 910 HLA match for Lily Hartman. The donor has agreed to proceed with preliminary health screening. Will confirm readiness within 72 hours. I read it twice, then a third time. 9 out of 10 wasn't perfect, but it was close enough to be viable. Sometimes, the only shot you got. By mid-morning, I was at the Hartmans' apartment. Rachel opened the door in sweats and a loose t-shirt, her hair pulled back without the precision I'd come to expect from her. She looked like she hadn't slept much, but when I told her, "They've found someone," the fatigue in her face shifted into something else, something halfway between hope and fear. "Anonymous?" she asked. I nodded. "They won't give us details until after the procedure, unless the donor chooses to come forward." Lily, who'd been sitting at the kitchen table with a half-eaten bowl of cereal, perked up. "Does this mean I get the bone marrow thing now?" Rachel forced a smile. "It means you might, sweet pea. But we still have to make sure this person can give it safely." The next 48 hours felt like waiting for a storm you could see on the horizon. Rachel was quieter than usual, checking her phone constantly. Lily seemed to sense the shift. She stayed close to her mother, but every now and then she'd glance at me like she was making sure I wasn't going anywhere. On the third day, the call came while I was changing brake pads in the garage. Rachel's number lit up my phone. "They're clearing the donor," she said, her voice shaking just enough to betray her relief. "We start the conditioning regimen next week." Conditioning regimen was medical shorthand for the brutal prep before a transplant. High-dose chemotherapy to wipe out the patient's bone marrow, making space for the donor's cells. I knew what it would do to her body. I also knew it was the only way forward. I spent the rest of the day helping them prepare. Lily would be in the hospital for weeks, maybe longer. So Rachel made lists: pajamas, her favorite blanket, a stack of books. I picked up extra chargers, soft hats for the hair loss, and a small Bluetooth speaker so Lily could listen to audiobooks when she was too tired to hold a page. Rachel tried to keep busy, but there were moments when she'd just stop mid-task, her hand resting on the edge of the counter, staring into some private place of worry. "You're not alone in this," I told her once. She looked at me like she wanted to believe it but wasn't sure if she could. 2 days before the transplant, I stopped by with a thermos of caramel latte, Lily's special request for Mom. The apartment was quiet when I knocked. Rachel answered, phone in hand, her expression unreadable. "Everything okay?" I asked. She hesitated. "The donor. They've gone quiet." My stomach tightened. "What do you mean, quiet?" "They passed the health screening, but now the coordinator says they're not returning calls. Could be nothing, but..." She cut herself off, glancing toward the living room where Lily was drawing. I kept my voice low. "If they back out..." "They won't," she said quickly. Too quickly. "They can't." But I knew better than to rely on strangers. The silence from the donor stretched into the next day. Rachel was trying to act normal for Lily, but every vibration of her phone made her flinch. I found myself checking my own phone more often than I wanted to admit. That night, I didn't sleep. I kept thinking about Sophie's face, the regret that had shadowed me since losing her. I couldn't let history repeat itself, not if there was something I could do. The call finally came the morning of the procedure. I was in the garage when Rachel's number flashed. I answered before the first ring finished. "They showed up," she said, and I could hear the unsteady exhale of relief on the other end. "They're in prep now. We're heading to the hospital in an hour." I closed my eyes for a second, letting the tension drain from my shoulders. I'll meet you there. Seattle Children's was a blur of motion that day. Nurses moved briskly through the hallways, IV poles rattling, monitors beeping in steady rhythms. I found Rachel and Lily in a private room, the walls painted with sea turtles and coral reefs. Lily grinned when she saw me. "You made it! I thought maybe you'd be fixing cars." "Not today," I said, pulling a chair to her bedside. "Today I'm on Lily duty." She looked at Rachel, then back at me. "And mom duty too?" "Always," I said, glancing at Rachel just long enough to see her look away, hiding whatever flickered across her face. That night, after the nurses dimmed the lights and Rachel drifted into an uneasy sleep in the chair by the bed, I stepped into the hallway. The storm outside had picked up again, rain streaking the hospital windows. Somewhere in the building, an anonymous donor had just given Lily her best shot at life. I didn't know who they were, and maybe I never would. But something in my gut told me this wasn't the end of the story. It was just a new chapter, and not all the pieces had fallen into place yet. And for reasons I couldn't quite explain, I felt a tug of unease, as if I'd been handed a puzzle without all its edges. The storm had passed by the time the hospital released Lily for her first week of monitored recovery. It was a fragile kind of peace. Blue skies edged with clouds, streets still damp from the night's rain. She was pale and tired, but the transplant had gone as well as anyone could hope. The doctors said it would take weeks to know if the graft had taken, but for now, her vitals were stable. That was enough to breathe again. Rachel stayed home with her, working remotely, while I returned to the garage. I'd missed the smell of steel and oil, the hum of the air compressor. But even here, I found myself glancing at my phone, checking for any update from Rachel. It was late afternoon when I heard a knock. Not the sharp rap of a customer, but softer, hesitant. Rachel stood in the doorway, hair pulled into a loose braid, eyes scanning the shop before they landed on me. "I was in the neighborhood," she said, stepping inside. "Thought I'd drop by." Her voice was casual, but her gaze shifted to my right arm. The sleeve of my t-shirt had ridden up, exposing the edge of a thick bandage. "What happened to you?" I reached for a rag, stalling. "Nothing serious, just a medical thing." Rachel's eyes narrowed. "Medical thing? Nathan, that's the same arm they use for—" She stopped, realization dawning like a light catching every corner at once. "You." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "You're the donor." I didn't answer right away. I set down the rag, leaning back against the workbench. HLA matched 9 out of 10. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. And it wasn't because of Sophie. It was because of Lily. Sophie would have wanted me to do it. Rachel shook her head slowly, as if trying to process the layers of what I'd just said. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because it wasn't about me," I said. "The focus needed to be on her recovery, not where the marrow came from. And I didn't want you to feel like you owed me anything." Her eyes glistened, though she didn't blink. "Nathan, you risked your health. You could have—" "I knew the risks," I cut in gently. "I also knew I couldn't stand by if I was a match. Not again." She took a step closer, her voice low. "You're walking around here with your arm bandaged, looking like it's no big deal, but it is. It's the biggest thing anyone has ever done for me. For us." I shrugged, though my chest was tight. "You'd have done the same in my place." She searched my face for a long moment, as if looking for a crack in the calm I was trying to project. Finally, she exhaled, her shoulders easing just a fraction. "Lily's been asking about you," she said softly. "She says you promised to visit." "I did," I said, managing a smile. "A pact's a pact." We drove back together, the late sun slanting across Queen Anne Hill, turning the wet streets into ribbons of gold. when we walked into the apartment. Lily was curled on the couch under a quilt, the little prince open in her lap. Her face lit up when she saw me. "You came!" "Wouldn't miss it," I said, taking the chair beside her. She tilted her head. "Mom told me you were the one who gave me the... what's it called?" "Bone marrow," Rachel supplied. "Yeah, that," Lily said. She studied me for a moment. "Does it hurt?" I held out my bandaged arm. "A little, but you're worth it." Her small hand reached over to pat mine gently. "Then I guess I'm keeping you forever." Rachel watched us from the kitchen, her eyes soft in a way I hadn't seen before. When Lily drifted into a doze, Rachel stepped over and spoke quietly. "You changed everything," she said. "Not just for her, for me." I met her gaze. "Then we're even. Because you and Lily, you've changed everything for me too." Outside, the skyline glowed against the darkening bay. Inside, the air felt different, less like a temporary truce, and more like the start of something we were all willing to fight for. A month after the transplant, Seattle felt like a different city. The sharp bite of winter had eased into the first hints of spring, longer daylight, the faint scent of wet earth in the air, and cherry blossoms beginning to blush along the sidewalks of Queen Anne Hill. Lily's hair was thinner now, her cheeks still pale, but the sparkle in her eyes was back. The doctors called her recovery encouraging. I called it a miracle in motion. Rachel's apartment had been transformed for the occasion. Strings of paper lanterns and pastel balloons lined the living room, and on the kitchen counter sat a cake with pale blue frosting that read, "Happy 6th birthday, Lily." I arrived early to help, my arms full of grocery bags and a wrapped box that was definitely too big to hide under the table. Rachel opened the door with flour on her cheek and a smile that made something warm settle in my chest. "You're early," she said. "You needed extra hands," I replied, stepping inside. As we set the table, Lily emerged from her room in a yellow dress, the quilt from her hospital bed now draped like a cape around her shoulders. "You look like royalty," I told her. "I am," she said matter-of-factly. "And since you saved me, you're my royal driver." Rachel laughed softly from the kitchen. "And what does a royal driver do?" "Drive us to cake," Lily said. "Immediately." Guests began to arrive. Neighbors, Rachel's co-workers, a few parents from Lily's class. The air filled with laughter, the clink of plates, and the kind of easy conversation that had been missing for months. I kept catching Rachel's eyes across the room, moments when the noise faded, and it was just the two of us, sharing the unspoken knowledge of how close we'd come to a very different kind of day. When it was time for presents, Lily insisted on opening mine last. She tore through the paper to find a small wooden box, hand-carved with stars and a fox. "It's for your special things," I told her. "Things you don't want to lose." She placed the little prince inside, then closed the lid with a nod. "It fits," she said simply. After the guests had gone and the apartment was quiet again, we stepped onto the balcony. The city lights shimmered against Elliott Bay, ferries gliding like slow lanterns across the water. Lily had fallen asleep on the couch, the quilt pulled up to her chin. Rachel leaned on the railing beside me. "She introduced you to everyone today as the man who will take care of my mom." I felt my throat tighten. "She still remembers that?" "She doesn't forget pacts," Rachel said. Then, after a pause, "Neither do I." I turned to her, the words forming before I could overthink them. "I don't know exactly what this is between us, Rachel, but I know it works. We fit." Her smile was small but steady. "We do." Inside, I lifted the sleeping Lily and carried her to her room. She stirred just enough to mumble, "Don't go far." "I won't," I whispered. And I meant it. Not just for tonight, but for all the days ahead. As I stood in the doorway, Rachel joined me. Her hand brushed mine, fingers curling just enough to hold. We stayed there for a moment, watching Lily sleep, the glow from the hallway spilling over her quilt. Outside, the city lights danced on the bay. Inside, we were something new. Not perfect, not planned, but exactly what we needed. We fit. And that was the journey of Nathan, Rachel, and Lily. From unexpected encounters in the rainy streets of Seattle to moments of facing illness, loss, and fear, and then walking together toward laughter and trust again. None of them set out looking for a new family, yet they found it in the most unlikely place. Thank you for staying with me until the very end, walking alongside them through every turn and change. If you enjoy stories about kindness, sacrifice, and second chances, make sure to subscribe so you won't miss the next one. Because who knows, the next story might touch your heart just the same.